What happens when a weapon learns to love? It's a strange question, I know. But in the mist-shrouded heart of the Appalachian Mountains, a retired Marine, his silent, traumatized daughter, and a dying dog were about to find an answer that would challenge the very definition of a soldier, a hero, and a family. Our story begins not with a bark, but with a silence so heavy it had a weight of its own. This was the silence that lived inside the small cabin of Mark Ryland. Every morning at 0300 hours, long before the sun even thought about rising over the Carolina foothills, Mark would be awake. He'd sit at his kitchen table, the phantom ache in the leg he'd nearly lost in Fallujah, a constant dull companion. He was a former Marine Force recon operator, a man trained to be a ghost on the battlefield, but now he was haunted by ghosts of his own. His "at ease" was a silent war. He'd methodically check the locks on the doors and windows, his eyes scanning the dark, dense tree line that surrounded his property. It wasn't a choice. It was a reflex, a code burned into his very soul. He was a sentry on a watch that never ended. And in that heavy silence lived his 8-year-old daughter, Lily. If Mark was rigid and controlled, Lily was fragile and ethereal, a ghost in her own home. Her world, once vibrant and loud, had shrunk to the size of their small wooden porch. Her sworn enemy wasn't a monster under the bed, it was the entire canine species. 2 years earlier, a tragic accident, a moment of chaos involving a neighbor's playful dog, had led to her mother's death. For Lily, the sound of a bark wasn't just a sound. It was a shattered kaleidoscope of fear and loss, a constant reminder of the day her world ended. She hadn't truly spoken more than a few words at a time since. It was on a rare, brave venture off that porch that everything changed. The autumn leaves were a riot of gold and crimson, and for a school project, Lily was determined to find the perfect one. She wandered farther than she was supposed to, down a slope toward the gurgling creek that marked the edge of their property. That's when she heard it, a sound that pierced through the silence, a low, guttural whimper, the sound of a life trying desperately to hold on. Her entire body froze. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to retreat back to the safety of the porch. But the sound came again, weaker this time, and it was tangled with something else. Suffering. For the first time in 2 years, a different feeling warred with her fear-empathy. She took a breath, turned, and ran not away, but back towards the cabin, screaming the one word that mattered: Dad. Mark found the dog half submerged in the muddy creek bed, hopelessly entangled in a forgotten roll of old farming wire. It was a large golden Labrador, so emaciated its ribs showed like a skeleton. Mark's training kicked in. He didn't see a monster. He saw a casualty, with the expert hands of a man who knew how to handle a crisis. He assessed the situation, snipped the wires, and carried the dog's limp body back to their home. As he and Lily worked through the night, gently cleaning the deep wounds and feeding the dog warm broth, Mark began to notice things, small details that didn't add up. There was a scar above the dog's left eye, not a jagged tear from a fight, but a thin, precise line, almost surgical. And as the dog regained a bit of strength, Mark felt the muscles along its back and shoulders. They were incredibly dense, forged, and conditioned. He'd felt that same hardened physique on the military working dogs he'd served with overseas. This was no ordinary stray. The final clue was the tattered collar. It wasn't leather or nylon from a pet store. It was made of military-grade webbing, and tucked under a flap, Mark found a tiny empty pouch just big enough for a GPS tracker or a data chip. He looked from the strange empty pouch to the sleeping dog, then to his daughter Lily, who was sitting on the floor a few feet away, watching the animal with an expression he hadn't seen in years. Not fear, but a hesitant, fragile curiosity. They had brought a casualty into their home, hoping to heal him. They believed they were offering a rescue. They had no idea they had just welcomed in a decorated soldier, a ghost of the battlefield, whose past was about to come knocking on their door. A past that was classified dangerous, and still very much alive. In the days that followed, the dog began to heal. The deep gashes from the wire closed, and the gauntness in his frame was slowly replaced by the powerful physique that lay beneath. But as his body mended, the mystery of who he was only deepened. This was no ordinary dog, and the first person to give him a new identity was the one who needed it most. Lily, still keeping her distance, decided he needed a name. Not a grand name, not a soldier's name, but a simple one. "Buddy," she whispered from the porch steps, and the dog's ears twitched a silent acknowledgement. A name, a connection, a single thread cast across a chasm of fear. Buddy's recovery brought a strange new rhythm to the isolated cabin, a rhythm of unsettling signs. Mark, ever the observer, started to compile a mental list of behaviors that sent a chill down his spine. One afternoon, a beat-up delivery truck backfired on the main road, a loud crack that echoed through the valley. Mark flinched. Lily gasped. But Buddy? He didn't jump or bark. In one fluid, silent motion, he dropped into a low, tactical crouch, his head swiveling, eyes scanning the tree line for a threat. It wasn't the reaction of a scared stray, it was the drilled-in muscle memory response to the sound of gunfire. Another time, Mark was about to walk into a dense patch of woods behind the cabin when Buddy planted his feet, refusing to move. A low, almost inaudible growl rumbled in his chest as he sniffed the air. Mark, trusting the dog's instinct over his own, backed away. He returned an hour later to find massive bear tracks in the soft earth exactly where they were about to walk. Buddy wasn't being stubborn. He was running a threat assessment. This is something we have to understand about elite military working dogs. They aren't trained to be pets. They are soldiers. They are taught discipline, observation, and a level of threat detection that rivals any piece of technology. Their loyalty is absolute, their purpose singular. They are forged in the crucible of conflict, and that fire never truly leaves them. Mark was watching this training unfold in his own backyard, and it was both magnificent and terrifying. The breaking point came a week later. Mark knew he had to take Buddy to a vet to check for diseases to make sure he was truly okay. The local vet, a kind woman named Dr. Evans, was amazed by the dog's recovery and his calm, disciplined demeanor. "Let's see who this handsome fella belongs to," she said cheerfully, pulling out a microchip scanner. She ran it over Buddy's shoulders. The scanner beeped, but the code that flashed on the small screen wasn't a standard civilian registration. It was a long, complex alphanumeric string. Dr. Evans stared at it, her smile fading. She looked up at Mark, her eyes wide with confusion and a hint of alarm. "Mark," she said slowly, "this dog isn't registered. He's encrypted. This is a U.S. Department of Defense asset tag." The air in the room went cold. Mark felt a knot tighten in his stomach. An asset. Not a pet, not a stray. An asset. Dr. Evans, seeing the look on Mark's face, made a call to a contact she had at a nearby military base. She read the code over the phone, her voice hushed. Mark could only hear one side of the conversation, a series of "Are you sure?" and "Oh my God." When she hung up, she looked pale. "His name," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "is K9 Unit 734, call sign Rogue. He was a single mission tracker dog attached to a Tier 1 Special Operations unit." She took a deep breath before delivering the final, impossible blow. "And according to the official records, Mark, he was declared killed in action 6 months ago during a classified operation in Venezuela. A ghost. A ghost had walked out of the woods and into their lives. A hero declared dead by the very government that had created him." As Mark stood there trying to process this impossible reality, that the gentle dog healing his daughter's shattered heart was a ghost of the special operations world. The quiet of the afternoon was broken by the sound of tires crunching slowly on his long gravel driveway. He looked out the window. It was a sleek black government SUV with tinted windows, the kind that doesn't show up in a place like this by accident. The past hadn't just come to reclaim him. It had come to collect its dead. The door of the black SUV opened with a quiet, solid thud. The man who stepped out was the embodiment of military precision. He was tall, lean, and wore his fatigues with an air of authority that no civilian could ever replicate. He moved with a purpose that told Mark everything he needed to know. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a recovery mission. "Mark Ryland," the man asked, his voice calm and even. He didn't offer a handshake. "I'm Sergeant Cole. I'm here for my dog." His eyes weren't on Mark. They were locked on Buddy, who was now standing at Mark's side, a low growl vibrating deep in his chest. Cole's expression softened for just a fraction of a second. "Rogue," he said, his voice softer now. "Stand down." The growl stopped instantly. The dog's posture changed, becoming rigid, alert subordinate. In that moment he wasn't Buddy anymore. He was K9 Unit 734. "He's not your dog anymore," Mark said, his own voice low and steady, placing a hand on Buddy's shoulder. "According to your own records, this dog is dead." "The records were wrong," Cole replied flatly. "He's a highly specialized government asset. He doesn't belong here." He then looked past Mark, his gaze falling on Lily, who was peering through the screen door, her face a mask of terror. "I'm not the bad guy here, Mr. Ryland. That dog. He saved my life twice overseas. He's my partner. I just want my partner back." And there it was, the impossible conflict. On one side stood Sergeant Cole, armed with the full force of the law, with duty, and with a bond forged in the crucible of war. On the other side stood Mark, a father with no legal claim, armed only with the fierce, desperate love for a daughter who had just started to find her voice again. In the civilian world, we have laws like Robbie's Law, which allows for the adoption of military dogs after they've retired. It's a beautiful system that gives these heroes a chance at a peaceful life. But Rogue wasn't retired. He was an active duty asset presumed dead. Legally, he was no different from a missing rifle or a stolen piece of classified equipment. Mark knew he was standing on ground that would crumble beneath him in any court of law. "He's not an asset anymore," Mark stated, his grip tightening on Buddy's shoulder. "He's family." Cole's jaw tightened. He had been patient, but his patience was wearing thin. "We're done talking," he said. He took a step forward and issued a command, his voice sharp a sound that could cut through the chaos of a firefight. "Fuss." It was the German command for heel. Rogue's training burned into his very DNA took over. His muscles tensed, and he took a half step toward the man who had been his entire world. Mark felt the dog being pulled away by a force stronger than any leash, the force of years of relentless, brutal training. He saw the battle in the dog's eyes, the conflict between his past and his present. From the cabin a small choked sound escaped Lily's lips, a whimper of pure heartbreak. Hearing it, Rogue froze. He stopped dead in his tracks, his body trembling with indecision. He looked at Sergeant Cole, the man he had followed into hell and back. Then he turned his head and looked at the small, terrified girl on the porch. He saw the tears welling in her eyes. Cole, sensing his victory slipping away, barked the command again, louder this time. "Fuss." But at that exact moment, another sound cut through the air. It wasn't a command. It was a plea, barely a whisper, from the little girl on the porch. "Buddy." The choice was made. In one definitive, world-altering moment, the dog turned his back completely on the sergeant. He ignored the command. He was bred to obey, walked slowly back to the cabin, and gently laid his head on Lily's lap through the screen door. He had chosen his new mission. Sergeant Cole stood there stunned into absolute silence. The disbelief on his face was profound. He had just witnessed an asset disobey a direct command. He had witnessed a soldier break formation. He had witnessed his partner choose a new family. He stood motionless for a long moment before turning and walking back to his SUV without another word. But before he got in, he turned back to Mark, his face a grim mask of defeat, and something else, something that looked like a warning. "You think you've won?" Cole said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You haven't won. You've just disarmed a loaded weapon and left it in your child's bedroom. A storm is coming, Mark, a real one. And when it hits, you'll see what a cornered soldier is truly capable of." He got into the SUV and drove away, leaving behind an ominous silence and a threat that hung in the humid Appalachian air, as dark and heavy as the storm clouds that were now gathering on the horizon. Cole's warning echoed in Mark's mind for the rest of the day, a chilling premonition that settled over the cabin like the low, heavy clouds that were now boiling over the mountain peaks. The sky turned a bruised, sickly purple. The wind began to howl, not like a whisper through the pines, but like a predator. This wasn't just a storm. It was an assault. Within an hour, the heavens opened. Rain fell not in drops, but in solid, wind-driven sheets that blurred the world into a churning gray watercolor. The gurgling creek at the edge of their property, the one where Lily had found Buddy, swelled and roared, transforming into a raging, muddy monster that devoured its banks and clawed its way toward the cabin. Mark was outside trying to dig a makeshift trench to divert the water when he heard a deep, groaning crack that seemed to come from the very mountain itself. He looked up just in time to see the hillside above them give way. A terrifying wave of mud rock and uprooted trees slid down the slope, not with a crash, but with a horrifying liquid roar. It slammed into the space between him and the cabin, severing his path, turning his home into an isolated, vulnerable island in a sea of destruction. He was cut off. Lily was trapped inside. His blood ran cold. Every nightmare he'd ever had on the battlefield was nothing compared to this. The feeling of being utterly, completely powerless to protect his child. Inside the cabin, the world was a symphony of terror. The power was out. The wind shrieked, and the sound of the rising water was a constant, hungry roar against the floorboards. Lily was huddled in a corner, paralyzed by a fear so profound it had stolen the air from her lungs. But Buddy was not scared. He was activated. In the chaos and the darkness, the lifetime of training that Sergeant Cole had warned about ignited, but not in the way Cole had predicted. This wasn't the blind aggression of a cornered animal. This was the focused calm of a soldier on a mission. He nudged Lily with his head gently but firmly, guiding her away from the groaning exterior wall and towards the sturdiest piece of furniture in the room, the heavy solid oak dining table. He pushed her underneath it, then positioned his own body at the opening facing the door, a living shield between her and the storm. He was no longer just her companion. He was her guardian. He was rogue, and his mission was clear: protect the asset. Outside, Mark was fighting a losing battle against the floodwaters, his mind racing desperation clawing at his throat. That's when a light cut through the deluge. A powerful spotlight mounted on the front of a high-clearance all-terrain vehicle. It was Sergeant Cole. He hadn't left. He'd been monitoring the storm, and his gut, the same instinct that had kept him alive in combat, told him that the man in the cabin was a Marine, and a Marine would be too stubborn to evacuate. He hadn't come for the dog. He had come for the soldier. There were no words exchanged. There was no time. Just a shared grim understanding between two men who knew what it meant to face impossible odds. They worked together, a silent, efficient team, using Cole's equipment to fight their way through the churning water and debris toward the cabin. They reached it just as the foundation finally gave way with a sickening crunch. The front wall of the cabin buckled inwards, a wave of water and debris exploding into the room. They saw it in the beam of their flashlights, a moment frozen in time. Buddy, seeing the wall collapse, hadn't run. He had lunged forward, covering Lily's small body with his own, taking the full impact of a splintering wooden beam across his back. He let out a sharp cry of pain, but did not move. Together, Mark and Cole tore through the wreckage, pulling the beam off Buddy's back and dragging Lily and her protector from the ruins of their home just before it was completely swallowed by the flood. As they sat in the back of Cole's vehicle, wrapped in emergency blankets, the storm still raging outside, there was a profound silence. Mark held his daughter, who was clinging to the fur of the injured, whimpering dog at her feet. Cole sat across from them, his face illuminated by the dashboard lights, looking at the animal he had called a weapon. In the heart of the storm, the lines had been washed away. There was no handler and no asset, no civilian and no soldier. There were only survivors bound by the unwavering courage of an animal who had been trained for war but had mastered the art of love. The storm eventually passed, leaving behind a world remade in mud and sorrow. The town of Havenwood was devastated, but in the heart of the wreckage, stories began to circulate. Stories of a golden Labrador who had shielded a little girl from a collapsing house. Buddy became a local legend, a four-legged symbol of resilience in the face of ruin. A few days later, Sergeant Cole found Mark at the temporary town shelter. There was no tension between them anymore, only a shared, weary respect. Cole handed him a folded flag, the flag from his dress uniform. "I filed my official report this morning," he said, his voice low. "I detailed how K-9 Unit 734, Rogue, was lost during the flood while performing a heroic rescue of a civilian child. I recommended him for a posthumous commendation." He paused, meeting Mark's eyes. "As far as the United States military is concerned, Sergeant, the hero K-9 named Rogue died in that storm. The dog you have is a stray named Buddy. He's all yours." It was an act of rebellion, an act of humanity, a soldier's final salute to his partner's new mission. In the weeks and months that followed, something remarkable happened. The shared trauma of the storm didn't break Havenwood, it forged it into a community. And at the center of that rebirth were a man, a girl, and their dog. Mark Ryland, shaken from the quiet war of his past by the very real war to save his daughter, found a purpose he thought he had lost forever. His marine skills were no longer ghosts that haunted his nights, but tools he used to lead the town's new volunteer emergency response team. He organized, he trained, he inspired. He was no longer just a veteran, he was a leader again. And Lily was no longer the silent girl on the porch. Facing down the storm had extinguished the embers of her old fear. She found her voice in the quiet empathy she shared with the dozens of animals displaced by the flood. She became a fixture at the new animal shelter that was built with community donations, her gentle presence a comfort to the scared and the lost. And Buddy. He became the soul of the town. He was a therapy dog without any official papers, a silent guardian who seemed to understand precisely who needed a gentle nudge of his head or a comforting presence at their feet. He was a soldier who had finally truly come home. The final scene of their old life closing and their new one beginning came 6 months later. The new Havenwood Community Center and Animal Shelter stood proudly where the floodwaters had been deepest. The evening sun was painting the Carolina Hills gold. Mark was demonstrating a rope-tying technique to a group of new volunteers. Lily was sitting on the shelter's new porch, confidently showing a young boy how to hold a leash with a puppy on the other end. Buddy lay beside her, his head resting in her lap, his eyes half closed in the warm sun. He bore a new scar on his back from the fallen beam, a physical reminder of his choice. Lily ran her fingers through the fur behind his ears. "You don't have to be a soldier anymore," she whispered, her voice clear and steady. "You're home." Buddy's tail gave a slow, gentle thump against the wooden planks, and for the first time in his life he slept not with the coiled readiness of a warrior on watch, but with the deep, peaceful surrender of a soul that is finally completely safe. We often think of scars as ugly reminders of the pain we've endured, but sometimes they are maps. They show us not what we've lost, but what we've survived. They can guide us to where we need to go. Mark's scars led him to become a leader. Lily's led her to find her voice. And a dog named Rogue, a dog with scars both seen and unseen, followed his all the way home. Their story teaches us that healing isn't about erasing the damage. It's about finding the courage to build a new, stronger purpose on top of it. It's about finding your new mission. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey with Mark, Lily, and Buddy. Stories like these remind us of the incredible life-changing bond we can share with animals. If their story moved you, we'd be so grateful if you'd give this video a like. It truly helps our channel grow and share more tales of hope and courage. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. We'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Have you ever had an animal in your life that helped you through a difficult time? Share your story with us. We read every single one. Thank you again for listening. We'll see you in the next video.